Thames. Ships.
Porthole.
Horizon.
Stars.
Black hole.
Time. Clock. Compass. East.
West.
Meridian.
On the Line, podcast stories from Greenwich.
My first impressions of the Arctic the first time I went there were awe-inspiring. The colours, the scenery, the vastness of this huge, on the one hand, empty open space. On the other hand, it was teeming with life in all kinds of subtle forms, from the large-scale polar bears and narwhals to the minute-scale phytoplankton.
The climate is changing more rapidly in the Arctic than anywhere else on the planet. The Arctic sea ice has reduced by more than 30% in the last 30 years and is now diminishing at more than 10% every decade. And the changes in the Arctic, which are so extreme and more extreme than anywhere else on the planet, were like a wake-up call to the planet that climate change is really happening.
So if we're not going to visit the Arctic, does it matter that the Arctic is going to melt? Yes, it does, because changes in the Arctic have a knock-on effect elsewhere in the world. As the Arctic ice cap melts, the effect of the ice reflecting sunlight energy back out into space gets lost, and so the oceans warm up as a result. If the Arctic ice cap melts, there is one hypothesis, which is a fairly strong hypothesis, that it will disturb the ocean currents that bring warm water to northwest Europe.
So the Gulf Stream is the very large-scale current that flows in the North Atlantic, and it takes salty water from the Gulf of Mexico, transports it northwards, warm salty water from the tropics, gradually cools, and cold salty water is very dense, and then that sinks in the North Atlantic. And that whole flow of warmer water is actually keeping the UK and northwest Europe warmer relative to its position as a latitude.
Which means that one of the reasons we call it climate change is that whilst the rest of the world might be getting 3 degrees warmer, it could well be that in northwest Europe, in Britain, in Ireland, in Germany and France, we get 3 degrees cooler. And although the Arctic ice cap itself melting doesn't add to sea level, the surrounding glaciers and the landlocked ice does. And for people who live in places like India, Bangladesh, that sea level rise will be fatal.
There's 7 metres of sea level rise locked into Greenland alone. The real worry is with climate change in terms of sea level rise is melting of that land ice and acceleration of sea level rise in the future.
Well, climate change is going to have an impact on people in the high Arctic, particularly their traditional way of life, which is already under pressure from environmental change and from the fact that there are so many people elsewhere.
A warmer atmosphere contains more moisture. When we get the most extreme rainfall, there's more moisture there to rain out. Terrible weather that's, for example, affected Pakistan in the summer of 2010, and we see the consequences of these very extreme floods and people being drowned and losing their homes and livelihood. And even regions like the Mediterranean could be very difficult. There will be widespread drought, and there will be not sufficient water for all the people that live around the Mediterranean.
The Arctic is very much the barometer of the state of our planet today. The changes that are taking place as a result of climate change are happening most noticeably in the Arctic environment.
People can adapt. I think the biggest loss, the loss of the beautiful ice and the cold Arctic landscape, that's part of the soul of the people who live there.
For more On the Line, visit nmm.ac.uk/explore.